What do you get when you take a bunch of hungover teenagers, we'll say, or 20-something-year-olds? I mean, really, I think we all know that they're 30. Throw a monster that has a neurotoxin capable of completely locking up your meat suit and put them all on a beach together? Well, if you answered a buffet, then you are correct. Mainly because every decision made in this movie virtually makes no sense and is based on nothing. And likely that's probably because this is on a beach in California and it's spring break. And if you remember anything about spring break, then you must be a nerd who cares about their body's well-being. And you're actually probably doing pretty well right now. But for the rest of us dregs of society, basically your brain switches off and the hormones run wild with ethanol. And this beach is no different. After a large group of friends head out there to party on the beach and then hand over their phones as to not end up on the internet, a few of the dude bros end up finding something slimy on the beach. Doing the smart thing, they bring it back to the party and then continue to party. Awakening the next morning, the remaining group realizes that they are alone and something is actively stalking them underneath their feet. In today's episode, we'll be discussing this creature, why it's horribly adapted to hunting virtually a large chunk of animals on this planet, what is happening to the human body once you get touched, and let's also talk about how to beat this thing, because my god. But first, this episode is sponsored by Audible. Are you ready to start listening with a free 30-day Audible trial to get full access to thousands and thousands of all-you-can-listen-to audiobooks, original entertainment, and podcasts that are included in the Plus catalog? Well, by visiting audible.com/Roanoke or texting Roanoke to 500-500, you too can achieve greatness. So this week, I'm actually currently driving across the country to visit family out in Colorado from Georgia, and as you might guess, it's kind of a trek. I found that music is nice for the first 4 hours of a trip, but eventually your mind begins to wander, and you really just kind of want to listen to a story. Audible's selection of every genre you can think of, like mysteries, thrillers, wellness, business, and more, I definitely do not have any difficulty finding something that I'll enjoy. Like for instance, I just straight up like mainlining World of Warcraft lore into my brain case because lately I've just gone full nerd at this point. So basically, it just has something for everyone to enjoy. Plus, what's also great is you get rewarded with a free audiobook by using the vanity URL or text message code. So choose a title that you've been wanting to listen to and test it out for yourself. So again, as new members, you can try Audible for free for 30 days by visiting audible.com/Roanoke or texting Roanoke to 500-500. All right, let's get back to it. So we kick off this thing the same way we kick off all spring break movies, with some partying. So let me set the stage. Super drunk hot girl, sitting in the way distance to denote how far they are away from everyone. Ex-girlfriend shows up for some reason, and she doesn't want to drink till she sees her ex show up in his BMW on sand, which is 100% getting stuck, as if I recall, this is rear-wheel drive, and that sand looks really soft, so no kidding, that dude just straight up beached this when they had to film it. But as they continue to rage, Mitch yells out to everyone that they need to put their phone in the bag so nobody ends up on the internet. Extra party girl number 3 states that she needs her phone, which sends Mitch into a blind rage about how everyone saw the invite and has to adhere to the rules. So as the night continues, Marcia keeps flashing the camera as one does on spring break. Man, I do miss freshman year. But anyhow, I can't show you this, otherwise Susan will be on me like white on rice, and that's only because it's not associated with, yoga or art. Really, look it up. It's on YouTube. It's insane what's on this platform sometimes. But during the later part, when the firewood begins to run out, 2 people are sent out to find more. Looks like Gilbert and Vance. But instead of coming back with the firewood, they come back with what appears to be a giant gooey egg of some sort. Maybe it's a meteorite, but I can't see any of the burns from entering Earth's atmosphere. So then they set it down remarking that, hey, this thing is pretty gooey, and then they just go back to raging. So Mitch tries to make some moves on Kaylee, but then gets shot down, major oof, and everyone else proceeds to do exactly what everyone does on spring break. So now it's officially the next morning. The car lights are dimming, which will be hilarious later on, and I'll explain why. Also, the night before, Gilbert gets anatomy drawn on his face. Everyone wakes up the next morning to what promises to be an absolutely horrendous day, even if there wasn't anything trying to eat them. Kaylee is the first to wake up and sees basically most of her friends are gone. Her ex and Shonda are passed out in the car along with Vance and Ronnie. Kaylee is fairly upsetty spaghetti, but then sees that her ex is moving, so she walks away and realizes that most of her friends have just basically completely bailed. Or have they? As she watches a bird, something weird starts happening. Looks like the bird can't escape. Also, Marcia is sleeping topless on the picnic table. As she leans over after waking up, she starts puking. Same. So have you ever literally thrown up Pepto-Bismol? It's kind of alarming. Anyhow, Kaylee watches as the bird gets pulled under the sand, which means things aren't probably going to be awesome that day. Kaylee tries to warn Marcia, but she puts her foot in the sand and immediately gets stuck. As she reaches down to unstuck her foot, her hand now also gets stuck as she starts screaming. And I'm pretty sure there's a joke in here somewhere about your hand getting stuck. Help me, step monster. I don't know. Anyways, Jonah is about to go out and help, and I know I'm hitting you with a ton of names right now, but Shonda is like, bro, start the car. So here's how there's a first example of the producers of the movie knowing literally nothing about cars. Despite the battery being completely drained, the starter actually turns over, which that's what the starter runs off of. So no battery, no starter. So the engine turns because of the starter, and it won't completely start, which actually denotes a fuel delivery issue or oxygen issue, not a battery issue. I remember thinking, like, while I was watching this, like, bro, what? But then again, it is a BMW. So Ronnie keeps screaming at Vance to look at her as he ran over to help Marcia, but then immediately fell. This gets Mitch to finally go and try to find something to throw to him, but as Vance attempts to get up, we see his face meat has begun to melt. But at that angle, there was no way Ronnie saw, so how could she possibly know what his face looks like? Which is also another head scratcher, but hey, who cares? Because look at that eyeball, it's pretty gross. So now Vance gets completely pulled under by the Sandman. Jonah says it was quicksand and that they need to get over there to dig him out, but I gotta tell you, I know this was like a well-known meme at this point, but I truly did believe as a kid quicksand was going to be more of a problem as an adult. And actually, I've been in quicksand too, and it is literally so easy to get out of. I feel like I've been lied to virtually all of my life. But Ronnie is spitting facts over here and says the sand devoured him, so it must be like a government spill or some sort of chemical within the sand. And honestly, yeah, I could see it. So now Mitch tries to calm everyone down, and then they ask where the phones are, and it turns out that they're in the trunk of the BMW. Everyone gets upset because you can't pop the trunk with a dead battery. Well, the good news is BMWs literally have access to the trunk through the back seat. You'll see why this was mad annoying later, but this causes everyone to get butthurt because it was Mitch's idea to lock the phones in the trunk. Like again, just pull down the back seat. But of course, everyone is hungover and not thinking straight, I guess. So Jonah keeps trying to turn over the car, and it sounds pretty strong to me. Haley now then heads to the edge of the ramp to try to get the feelers to come out of the sand and touch her hand, which shows her what's underneath. Just then, the trash man wakes up, also known as Gilbert. As he tries to get out, everyone tells him to stop as everyone else has gotten body. He doesn't believe them at first, but he agrees to hang out in the trash can for a little while longer. Why he wouldn't just hop the trash can over to the ramp? Again, the decision making in this movie is something to truly behold. So now we play the waiting game, while little hairs attack the tires, but to no avail. Kaylee and Mitch keep drinking because what else is there to do, while Ronnie writes notes to her parents about biting the dust, and Gilbert just sort of hangs out in the trash can. I fully believe to get this movie to feature length, they did these long waiting filming shots because otherwise this movie would have been probably about 12 minutes long. Kaylee finally asks Mitch what happened last night. Why could they walk on the sand then, but they cannot walk on the sand now? As Mitch completely dodges the question or answers it vaguely enough, he finds some sunscreen. So Kaylee goes outside to ask competent people what changed from last night. This makes a realization dawn on them that everyone that crashed out on the sand has basically been eaten at this point, which is a major bro moment. They were only saved because they just so happened to choose high up areas out of the sand. So we see this delineation between Shonda and Kaylee, right? So Mitch throws the actual sunblock to the car, and Kaylee's like, oh, Jonah, you could totally make the throw, and Shonda's like, nah, bro, you suck. But then he makes it to Gilbert, and he's able to put on sunscreen because he's just getting blasted throughout the entire day. Over in that direction, somehow Kaylee didn't see it earlier, but they see the gooey egg thing from last night has hatched, so that must be what's underneath the sand. Kaylee has the dumb idea that it can't be that big as it just hatched last night, so they use the last of their food to throw hot dogs to see exactly where the end of this creature is. Mitch throws one to the seagulls like a scrub. Way to go, Mitch. Which, I mean, honestly, why are they even worried about food? They drank the night before. They're already dehydrated to the point that being in direct sunlight, they will dry out in about 2 days. So they really wouldn't starve to death. But as the bird goes to get the hot dog, this shows something really is in the sand as the bird gets eaten. But as they throw it the other way, they see that there is an end to this creature, and they just need to get there. Shonda says to sit tight, but Ronnie tells them that nobody is coming. Jonah at this point has like 1,000 IQ move. Using 2 surfboards, he puts them one over the other and is able to traverse the sand. So now we know how it works. But instead of continuing to walk out of the area, he decides to get upset with Kaylee and accuses Mitch of hitting her up like, bro, not the time. But you'll see this several times because people's timing in this movie is hilarious. So my man Gilbert tells them basically cut the bullshit, but as Jonah goes to step on the picnic table, Jonah had actually skipped core strength that day with planks, and as a result, the creature is able to stab at his stomach, but he's able to get up on the table. However, once there, he's in extreme pain. It sort of knocks out his hearing and gives him megatinnitus for about a moment and then slows his heartbeat, but it wears off quickly enough for him to move. Ronnie says that it must be poison, but actually it's venom. And see, Ronnie actually has, I think, the most brains in this movie. Jonah then drops a banana on the ground, but is able to get it before the tentacles do. So, like, after this, he jumps into the sand and says, it's fire. Like, I really don't get this. I guess the fire from last night maybe stopped the tentacles from going to that specific area, but that should have, like, long since cooled. And why does this even matter? Like, this was a huge risk to jump feet first into something that's literally eating everybody with virtually no payoff. But as he flexes on the tentacle monster, he looks down at his stomach to see that his eczema is flaring up again. He throws up like Marcia did earlier too, which maybe says she had gotten infected or at least poisoned and didn't know it. So now Kaylee tells him to get on the table and that they told him not to go over there, but now that he needs to throw them the food and water. Yeah, he should have just used the surfboards to walk out of the area and go get help. Smart. Or hey, use the surfboards to maybe open the friggin' trunk. But as Jonah goes to throw more Pepsi products to everyone, he misses and Mitch loosens up the railing as Jonah's stomach begins bursting open with blisters. Now Gilbert starts talking about the phones, right? Ronnie tries to go through the back seat to get to the trunk, which you can 100% do in a BMW, but then elects to go and stand on the bumper to open the trunk because she can't get through the seat. Again, I think they all could have survived if they just used that frontal lobe rather than whatever they're using now. So standing on the bumper, Shonda holds onto Ronnie, but as Ronnie opens the trunk lid, it hits her shins, so she can't get it open fully. Man, a surfboard would have come in handy right about now. Or, maybe that door for the lifeguard shack, or a floor mat, or even a towel that they are standing on. Mitch finally pulls out the rescue hook, which allows for enough space for Ronnie to open the trunk lid, but in the distance, a beach patrol is approaching. The driver honks the horn, which somehow scares Ronnie as she falls and gets her fingers caught in the trunk lid. So they yell to beach patrol about what's going on, but he really doesn't believe them, and he's like super standoffish. He instead asks everyone where are the hallucinogens, which, honestly, I probably would think the same thing. He steps out, but his shoes protect him from the monster. See, what if you had hooves? This thing couldn't do anything to you, but he walks around completely immune to the creature's tentacles and neurotoxin. So he keeps walking and making fun of everyone as he tells Kaylee and Mitch to come down. They decline as he threatens to pepper spray them in the face for it. He then drops his keys reaching for the pepper spray, and as he reaches for them, he gets stuck. Kaylee tells him to use the pepper spray on his arm, but it's pulled down, and as he actually uses the pepper spray, he pulls up only half his arm, which that kind of sucks. As he sits there meeting his end at the foot of his own hubris, he is pulled under and eaten by the creature. Mitch has another big brain play at this point. He wraps his feet in towels, pulls a Keemstar, and tells us how fast he actually is. As he leans against the railing though, oops, he falls in and immediately gets grabbed. But because he fell spine first, his body is immediately immobilized as nobody is able to help him. At this point, he's eaten pretty quickly, worse than the others, and I kind of have an idea why, but still, it seems out of this thing's MO. But eventually he's pulled under as well, and that's all she wrote for Mitch. Kaylee now has an idea. The railing is coming towards Shonda, so she tells her to grab it, and then Kaylee finally starts breaking down the guard shack, which they should have done forever ago. Kaylee then jumps into the car and punches Shonda for stealing her boyfriend. They were already broken up. I'm not sure how that's stealing a boyfriend, but Kaylee's plan is to get Jonah, who's not looking so hot. But just kidding, he's beautiful. So now Operation Free Ronnie's Hand commences as they're able to use the strawberry jam to get her fingers out. Meanwhile, Gilbert is attempting to turn the trash can around so that he can actually see what's going on, but this opens up a deeper cut onto his stomach. Now this has marginal issues as the creature is attracted to blood. Shonda tells Kaylee her and Jonah are the perfect couple, which, bro, nobody cares about that at this moment. And then she calls herself a man stealer, okay. So as they use the railings to now walk across, as Shonda now talks more crap about how she slept with Jonah, again, what is up with being over the sand, literally over a monster's mouth, and dropping all these confrontational comments? It's very bizarre. Work as a group, get to safety, and then you can talk smack. That's usually what you should do. Now Gilbert starts talking about how he's bleeding. Kaylee gets to Jonah, but he's near unconscious, and it's also Ronnie's turn to cross the plank of wood. And for some reason, she stops and looks at her hand like an idiot, which causes her to fall. The pepper spray works momentarily, but she is also brought down into the sand as the little hairs begin reaching up for the blood of Gilbert that he is dropping. And it does not take those little hairs long. Shonda puts a towel on her feet and makes her way to the beach patrol truck as Gilbert has the creature eat through the metal of the trash can. It reaches up and wraps around Gilbert and appears to be in his body as it then pulls him down into the sand through the trash can. Mega bummer, bro. So now it's Kaylee, Shonda, and a nearly bodied Jonah. The creature then reaches up and shakes the beach patrol truck, causing Shonda to get knocked out somehow as Kaylee takes a quick nap for the evening. And again, for your own information, the amount of time that Shonda was knocked out, that denotes brain damage. You shouldn't be knocked out for more than a few seconds. If it's minutes, that's a problem. So Shonda gets up on the roof rack because she finally wakes up at this point and then finds a raft. She throws it down and inflates it. And again, now they have the opportunity to, leave, but instead they walk along where the fire was and then go into the raft. They get into the car, but Big Papa under the sand is upsetty as he comes out at night, mostly. So here we get the battle because you knew it was coming. Kaylee grabs a gas can as the creature impales it. So she grabs another and dumps the gas all around the car, and I'm sure that won't catch the car on fire, but she is able to light the matches from earlier as it burns one of the tentacles of this thing. Kaylee runs and gets into the car as the thing tries to open the door, but the door locks exist, so that's not working. And then 100 tentacles show up, and according to the internet, that's not a good thing. But as they sit in there, it just sort of stops. Very anticlimactic. Shonda gives Kaylee Jonah's hand. At this point, the dude isn't doing too well. They then have this nice cry as one does, and this shot goes on for way too long, but now it's the next morning. Jonah is definitely bodied as he's looking gray AF. A guy then knocks on the car door, showing that whatever was in the sand is now gone. Kaylee and Shonda get out of the car and start walking away with no explanation explanation as to why there's a body in the beach patrol car. The guy attempts to check on Jonah, but there's no response. And as we pan out, it reveals the sunken area as the creature has now headed out into the ocean, moving towards another area of California, where as soon as it was identified, this thing would be bodied within minutes with a concussive force detonator. So first things first, what exactly is this creature? Well, as made mention in an earlier iteration of this movie's creation, and for some reason not put in this version, it mentions how likely 66% of all life forms in the ocean have not been discovered yet. Obviously, this is our best guesstimation because how can you catalog something you've never seen before? With that said, keep in mind, we find animals all the time in the ocean that we've never seen before simply because when it comes to the ocean, we haven't physically seen most of it. I made mention in one of my videos a while back that we have only really explored about roughly 5% at this point, and sonography doesn't count. I mean, sure, we can bounce sound waves off the bottom of the ocean and then call it explored, but if you haven't seen it and it hasn't been seen, studied, or really learned about concerning fauna and flora of the area, I wouldn't call that explored. I would call that mapped, which is why we have mapped the surface of Mars and the moon, but barely explored there too. So the point of that rambling is we definitely have not explored a lot of the ocean. We have mapped it, which are big differences. With that said, because we haven't looked into it, when we do, surprise, surprise, we end up finding a lot of animals that we never knew existed. Now, obviously, there's a glaring issue with this creature. It's not in some unmapped area of the ocean, and thusly, we've never really encountered it. It's just straight up adapted to life within the sand itself. And not only that, but it has adaptations specifically designed to help it become more aggressive at night. So let's first discuss here this creature and where it came from. Now, because we don't know everything there is to know about everything in planet Earth and the oceans, it's entirely possible that it did come from Earth and it's a natural organism of this world. But that seemed a little suspicious to me. But let's pretend for a moment that it does hail from this planet. Getting a look at its size, that would seem to suggest deep sea gigantism is at play. For all those that don't know what deep sea gigantism is, once you get down into the colder waters where there is less food available, the bodies of animals will increase in size due to efficiency matters. For a larger animal, they could maintain their temperatures more adequately than a smaller creature would be able to. To add to this, a larger body size can improve the ability to forage for widely scattered resources, which this begins to tread into Kleber's rule. And that states that the larger an animal is, the more efficiently its metabolism will run. These two major factors have been shown to increase several animals' mass, including Cnidarians, which specifically relate to what we are talking about today. Cnidarians exhibiting deep sea gigantism are freaking gigantic. I know, I possess the descriptive powers to match Stephen King, but floating around down there in the pitch black waters with food scarcely available, they'll have their tendrils and tentacles spreading out to ridiculous proportions. The larger of the jellyfish that we know of can grow to a length of 120 feet or 36.5 meters, which is the size of a blue whale. But remember, the body of the creature isn't this long, it's the tendrils and tentacles themselves. But considering that's what's spread out in the surrounding area to sting and grab any fish that may happen by, this gives them some pretty good real estate to hunt in. But here we run into one major issue that this thing has originating from this planet, its ability to burrow under the sand. We see this thing comes from quite a large egg, and when it's found, the question is, how did this get up here? What a lot of people don't realize is taking an animal from the deep sea to the surface is actually incredibly painful for the animal, sort of like dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean. You're just gonna straight die. And that's because animals are typically adapted to either living in shallow areas of water or the deepest point, with the exception being whales and likely the megalodon back in the day. But for an animal to live full time at the bottom of the ocean and come up to the surface regularly, it's a bit odd for specifically a Cnidarian to do so. But not only that, but for it then to move onto land in the first place, we need to overhaul its entire evolutionary and resulting physiological pathways. You see, jellyfish are essentially supported by a hydrostatic skeleton, which is just hydrostatic shape in water. However, when going onto land, they should dry out almost immediately and deflate, and this leads them to meet their end fairly quickly, as their bodies were never designed to live on land in the first place and are critically dependent on the support of water. Sort of like how whales breathe air, but upon beaching themselves without the support of water, they will suffocate with their own weight due to gravity. Land is tough on animals not specifically adapted to it. I mean, being on land even destroys animals that are adapted to it. Take humans, for instance. When we are young, our muscles and bones support us adequately, but as we age, typically it's a fall that will get us. And if you want to know what's horrifying about that, it's not so much a fall breaking your pelvis, with the fall being the culprit. Sometimes you can literally just take a step and your femur head breaks, leading you to fall and then break your pelvis. Not life, it's a nightmare, but hey, you know what? It sure beats the alternative. Anyhow, without this hydrostatic pressure backing the jellyfish, it will lose its ability to move or even maintain its shape, which is another thing that hints at it probably not being from Earth. The tentacles of the jellyfish can be moved within the water, but during the attack in the final scene, we see that the tentacles operate a lot like how a squid or octopus would operate its tentacles. This is also something that jellyfish hailing hailing from Earth would not be able to do once leaving the water. But again, assuming it's from Earth, not only would it need the aforementioned change to its evolution, considering we see no other Cnidarians do this, but it also would need to have remained hidden from humans for almost our entire history, which is likely not possible. Currently, about 40% of the Homo sapiens race lives within 100 kilometers of the ocean. There's no reason to also think that wasn't standard back in the day. Humans have always loved and hated the ocean at the same time, probably because of what's down there and our stories, and it's all horrifying. But with this, surely someone would have come into contact with this specific species at some point and written about it. The fact is, there is just too much overlap with human habitation for this creature to have flown under the radar for that long. Not to mention, at the end, we see it swimming towards the more populated area of California. This thing is like massive, like way larger than any Cnidarian that we have seen before, and it is in shallow waters, which would denote potentially it does not have deep sea gigantism, but maybe it may just be a larger species than what we would expect, indicating completely separate evolutionary pathways from the animals on this planet. Another indicator that there may be some sort of deep sea life at play here, though, is that what happens at night. During the day, you cannot see it, but when the creature's tentacles come up at night, it shows that it possesses the ability of bioluminescence. Now, this may not seem like much, but on Earth, there are actually a lot of creatures that will use this to draw in prey as they are drawn to the light. This hunting technique is a great way to get prey interested in what you are doing, as they may think, hey, that's an easy meal for itself, only to realize that the creature is massive and ultimately ends up eating them. But enough with the jellyfish rating, let's talk about its durability. I think we can all see at this point that nothing this creature does would indicate it came from Earth, but instead likely came from somewhere else. The most plausible explanation I see is what I usually believe happens with these things. This thing was hanging out in the ocean on its homeworld, or maybe under the sand, that may actually experience either freezing, where having a larger body would be advantageous in terms of metabolic efficiency and ability to hunt. But on this world, it also had the capability of going on the land, specifically in the sand, and attacking creatures that live there. Then something happened. Either it was ejected in ice, or an egg somehow was thrown off the planet. Could have been an impact. It could have been aliens flying overhead and accidentally dropped the egg. Who knows? But because of its blatant inability to account for things like materials such as shoes, which means likely it would not be able to account for hoofed animals as well, this would mean that while there was life on the surface of that planet, they were not ungulates or possessing hooves. Being underneath the sand, while likely not being as large as it would be in the water itself, this would definitely require more structural support than just having hydrostatic pressure, as mentioned with the earth jellyfish. We can see roughly the size of the body and how much space it took up when it hatched as a youngling, which deflated the sand roughly about 5 feet or so, which I do have to bring something up. While this creature may or may not have been a beneficiary of deep sea gigantism, I do believe to a certain degree, while it can hunt in the sand, this is entirely predicated on something that lies below the sand. So have you ever dug down, like, well, at least a few feet into the sand? When you do, you'll find water mixed with the sand itself. So much water, in fact, that you can dig away the sand and create a little mini pool in which you can sit in. Because of this, that's how I believe this creature is actually surviving down there, and likely survives on its own previous planet. Being in the sand, it is able to use the water to maintain structural support to a degree, along with other internal systems, seeing as it can operate its tentacles outside the influence of water, which allows it to survive. That means those tentacles would need to be able to latch onto support to be able to move in this way. But I also believe it needs this water in the sand because if you notice, the creature never comes out during the day. Only at night does its tentacles breach the surface, likely indicating that it would quickly dry out when exposed to the sun. And this is where the next hunting adaptation comes into play. The creature never actually sends its tentacles up to the surface during the day, except for that one time where it grabbed Gilbert, but it does not drag them down with those tentacles if they touch the sand. Instead, it will send out these little tendrils likely attached to the tentacles lower down in the watery sand. When these things detect anything on the surface, it will go up and sting it. So how does this hunting technique work? Well, it actually appears to work in several ways. On the tentacles themselves, there are likely pressure sensing hairs. These hairs can feel when something is stepping on the sand as compaction increases in that specific spot. This is why when you put your foot down in the sand, it can detect that you are there. If you do it for just a few seconds, it can commence its attack. However, if the movement is too quick, like with the first few steps that Vance took, you might be able to get by. However, it does appear to learn somewhat and will predict your next move and bring you down quickly. Seeing as this creature is predatory in nature, this means it actively hunts, so it's not too surprising to see it predicting movements of its intended prey. But once these little hairs have detected your presence, it's all ogre now. The second way the creature hunts appears to be detecting chemicals or potentially body heat. I don't believe so much to be body heat, as the sand itself would be much warmer than the body of a person, so when it's reaching for Jonah, it may be reaching out as it felt the two surfboards and was predicting where he would be based on pressure, and after stabbing the surfboards with the little hairs, being that was unsuccessful, it may have understood that there was a better target further up. But the clearest indication that it may be able to detect animals by chemical is when Gilbert is bleeding on the barrel and it finds his blood. This appears to send it somewhat into a feeding frenzy, much like a shark detecting blood in the water. And this may hint at what it was doing in the alien oceans. It may have buried itself in shallow waters where the sand was, that may have had like tidal differences oscillating between covered up with water and exposed to air where animals would happen by, and it would hunt via pressure. In fact, we know in Earth's history there was a lot of instances where tiny islands would crop up and there was a super shallow ocean, and sometimes creatures would walk across sand land bridges, and this would be the perfect place for it to hunt. However, once in the water, it could hunt like most other predators. By moving into deeper water, it could pick up injured prey if they were bleeding, or even carcasses, and consuming them, which is why it became so aggressive when it came into contact with blood. But with anyone who fell into the sand, it didn't react as aggressively, except, completely tearing them apart on a cellular level. But speaking of hunting techniques, knowing where your prey is all well and good, but then the question is, what is this creature actively using to hunt? Well, much like most of the jellyfish out there, this creature appears to have a venom that, depending on where it hits, can give you some operation of your body, but not much. For instance, when it hits Vance as he runs over, because it hits his abdominal muscles, quadriceps, and biceps, those were completely inoperable. He was able to use his back muscle to pull himself up and his triceps to push off the ground, but fleetingly as the venom moved deeper into his system. With Mitch, when he fell, he screwed up bad. Going spine first, his spinal cord was immediately shut down, likely along several areas, not only stopping him from moving, but he could not even feel his entire body at that point, which that totally blows. But we see something interesting concerning Marcia and the beach patrol. Their hands and feet were first to get attacked, which in theory, they should have been able to retract that limb. However, they appear to have been stuck and were then pulled under as they sat there trying to remove their hand from the sand. Because of this, not only do the tendrils inject venom into their targets, but they also appear to hold on as well, likely wrapping around the limb or extremity and pulling under while injecting. As honestly, everyone who had just been stung on the hand should have been able to remove their hands from the sand. Now, what is the venom and how does it disrupt the nervous system functioning of humans or animals in general? The most closely related neurotoxin that exists on Earth right now would be known as tetrodotoxin. This poison is produced by organisms such as the pufferfish, ocean sunfish, and porcupine fish. If it's consumed, it can be fatal. So we can only assume if it's injected, it can basically go the same way given the dosage. But what's interesting is this specific neurotoxin can cause things like muscle weakness, nausea, vomiting, along with some other symptoms that usually happen within 30 minutes of ingesting. But with a direct shot to the body and bloodstream, the effects would be much quicker. The primary mechanism by which tetrodotoxin is toxic is through the inhibition of sodium channel functions, which reduces the functional capacity of neuron communication. This inhibition largely affects the susceptible subset of sodium channels known as TTX sensitive, which also happens to be largely responsible for the sodium current that drives depolarization phase of neuron action potentials. Basically, it'll disrupt polarization of the nervous system cells by inhibiting the cell to produce the voltage necessary to relay a signal. And because of this, the muscle will never receive a strong enough signal to move via the motor neuron's control. This ultimately renders the person paralyzed on the ground. As you may imagine, it's not really good to disrupt your nervous system functions. But wait, there's more. It appears with the cnidocytes, which are the stinging cells on the jellyfish tendrils, there's also a fluid released with each sting that appears to break down the actual tissue given time. This digestive enzyme may serve a purpose of breaking into the circulatory system on the intended prey, exposing the blood to the actual venom. Because remember, if you've been bitten by something venomous, that doesn't automatically mean it's in your bloodstream. A lot of times it can be relegated to simply just the integumentary system, rendering it painful but not deadly. With these cnidocytes, they release this fluid that immediately begins to break down the skin of Jonah as he gets just a few stings on his stomach, which allows the venom to enter the bloodstream, which we can hear when he lays down. His heartbeat slows and his tinnitus begins ringing in his ear as blood pressure likely drops considerably as the heart is subdued. Eventually though, it wears off, but it isn't the last of the venom issue. It appears that if the jellyfish is, say, hunting an area with like rocks, the prey may be able to make it to a rock. However, once the venom has entered the body, even if it's a small amount, this will ultimately destroy the prey, at least with humans. The body may not have a good way of breaking down this venom, and because of that, as Jonah's venom continues to circulate around his body, it's likely destroying more nervous system tissue along the way. The biggest issue is it's already gotten to his heart. Considering what it did to his stomach, we can assume at this point it has damaged his heart to a degree and eventually will begin screwing with the sinus rhythm of the heart. It can do this by moving into the interior of the atrium and ventricle areas to the sinoatrial node, as well as the atrioventricular node. This appears to take some time as Jonas survives for a while, but by morning, he flatlines out, likely due to cardiac arrest, as his heart went into fibrillation, as the heart's conduction system was interrupted due to the sodium channels being altered by the neurotoxin. Because if you didn't know, while we receive information for our heart to beat by the brainstem, the heart will actually beat on its own without a brain or body, as it possesses this electrical system to keep it moving. This is why you can completely snap your spinal cord in half at the neck, but your heart will keep beating without the influence of the brainstem. Also, I should put a caveat in this, there are still other nerves that connect to the area, but the point is, your heart can absolutely beat without your brain. Once your body is immobilized, it's basically game over at this point. You will be pulled down into the sand and eaten. You get a glimpse of this with Mitch when he's not even pulled down yet. The tendrils work their way through the body, dissolving your insides quickly once getting past the integument system. It's much like that of a bite of a spider dissolving the insects on the inside. And I have to tell you, I had to do 3 takes for just that one statement because I kept saying biter spite. Anyhow, this fast-acting method allows for the tendrils to take pieces and then relay it back to the creature underneath the sand, allowing it to eat and obtain nutrition from the animal. We've also seen when Gilbert is pulled into the trash can that likely this dissolving liquid was used at the base of the can to get past it, and when the tentacles came up, there appears to possibly be some mouths attached to the ends, which could actually be how the creature eats. So ultimately, how do you beat this thing? Well, unfortunately, it's going to take about 5 minutes of thought and the ability to break down things around you. I know, it's a tough one. You see, everyone in this movie is a complete idiot. Like, I cannot believe what I was seeing half the time. Actually, I can't believe what I was seeing most of the time. Scratch that. I can't believe what I was seeing. First things first, they did the smart thing and test where the edge of the creature's influence was. So A+ there. So that's what you would also want to end up doing. But on top of that, given the same exact sequences with the same materials around you, you see that nice lifeguard stand? First, check to see if there's a radio. If there's no radio, get into the trunk of the BMW. You can absolutely access the trunk by the back seat, and if the seat doesn't move, pull harder. I've literally ripped apart the interior of a car with my bare hands, and if I was scared of being eaten by a creature under the sand, you best believe I'm getting through that back seat. Tear off the rearview mirror and break it to produce something sharp and start cutting into the seats to get to the trunk. So let's say it's not possible because someone had like a crackhead idea to literally weld it up for some reason. I don't know, it could happen. So go back to the guard shack since you have people in there, and in the guard shack you have a door. Remove the door from its hinges. See if there's any wood that is loose and then throw it onto the sand. That's literally the easiest way to get to the trunk. They also had 2 surfboards. Use that to get to the trunk. Or after noticing what happens, the creature will literally push things off of its hunting area, meaning that it can move things. So it's not able to move heavy things like the car, but if you sit on a surfboard and shut up and don't make any sudden movements, the creature will likely just push you off of the hunting area. So basically, it becomes about finding something to stand or sit on that the creature will then instinctually move because it thinks it's inorganic. And then you just ride on top of that. And then you can get out of the area by shutting up. Once outside, you're free to go, because it does not appear that this creature can go very far inland. Every decision made in this movie makes me scratch my head. With the surfboards, why not tell everyone to hang tight and go get help? I mean, Jonah had it. Why not just ride the surfboards out of there? Why not, I don't know, cut through the seats of the trunk? Why not start tearing down the lifeguard shack for more materials to bridge gaps? And most of all, why not keep your feet off the ground and not trusting that, oh, we had a fire here last night, it's somehow a safe zone? Basically, as long as you don't make the choices that you have seen in this movie and you use the thing between your ears, you can absolutely survive this creature. It's almost too easy to survive this creature, which is why it's completely hilarious how many of them dropped. Their working survival instincts must have been like a 9-to-5 job, and it was Friday at 4:55. Basically, all work had stopped, and I suppose it just wasn't worth stopping and thinking about. But if it were worth thinking about, then it wouldn't have been near as fun to write about.